Hi, I'm Aoife, and in this video, I'll be going through my thought process while creating this illustration of Stark and Fern from Frieren. Frieren is one of, if not the most popular anime of 2024, so I had to see what all the hype was about. And wow, it did not disappoint. The animation during the action scenes was just breathtaking, but my favorite scene had to be the ballroom dance. Now, this scene didn't have any crazy special effects or fast-paced action, but it still placed number one for me. And that's because of the subtle yet impactful storytelling through the animation. I love the sway of the fabrics and hair, the elegant outfits, the attention to detail of the footwork and hand placement. Most of all, I loved watching Fern's expression change as she goes from being nervous to actually enjoying the dance. And I wanted to express all of this in my illustration. Now let's get on to the drawing process. Starting with the rough sketch, I map out the placement of the characters and their poses. Now the goal here is just to get the idea down on the canvas. Imagine you are molding clay into a sculpture. You start with the rough big shapes first. For some help, I used a reference photo to figure out the anatomy. And I really wanted to convey that feeling of movement, as if they are really in the middle of their dance, and to express that, I used those loose bits of the hair and the dress. The fluttering folds of the fabric will also contribute to the composition, as all of those flowing lines lead your eyes to the focal point, which will be Fern. As you can see, I'm struggling a lot with Fern's side profile, as it's a really off angle on the reference, and I'm also trying to stylize it into anime proportions at the same time, which really threw me off even more. In the end, I just gave in to using a 3D modeled head to help me get the angle right. Is it cheating? I don't know. I used the same technique with the 3D model for Stark as well. I guess side profiles are my weakness. I also gave him a calm and composed expression, which is totally the opposite of how he usually acts. I finished up the sketch by adding in some vague figures in the background to kind of fill up the negative space and create more of a ballroom environment. Once I'm happy with the sketch, I move on to rough colors. But before I even touch any colors, I like to plan out the values first and figure out where the light is coming from. You know what? Artists already have a lot on their plate to think about. Composition, lighting, hue. It's easier if we just break it down into steps and do them one by one, starting with tonal values. And oh, if you don't already know, tonal values are just how dark or light a shade is. Next, I slowly add in some colors, and warning, this painting went through a major ugly stage. I had to think a lot about the saturation, as the hair colors of Stark and Fern are extremely vibrant, and ideally you don't want such a high saturation in the majority of the drawing. Here, the contrast of the white dress and Stark's deep red outfit will be very eye-catching. And this was just not working well for me, so I decided to attempt from scratch another time. First off, using bold reds for Stark, with very vibrant colors where the light borders the shadow. Also, using a cool blue of reflective light from Fern's dress to contrast and balance it. Fern's hair might look very vibrant here, by the way, but that's because I was using CMYK colors, which, if you don't know, purple appears very gray on paper when printed. So the purple color appearing on the screen is strong here, but when printed, it will look much more muted. Already, this was working out better than my previous color draft, and I was finally satisfied to move on to shading. But before we get onto the shading, I'd just like to introduce today's sponsor, which is me. If you don't know already, I've been working hard to upgrade my tote bags to something much more unique and adding more value to it. So for the old bag, it was just plain beige everywhere, but for the new one, we've got some added in features. First of all is the inside lining of the bag, which I've now made to be a pattern of some little mini Frierens. How cute is that, guys? And also I've added in some inner pockets, a small one with a zip, and also a large slot for something like laptops or iPads. They're also wider on the bottom, so they can actually fit more things than just regular tote bags. So yeah, if you're interested to check those out, I should be opening pre-orders already, so get one while you have the chance. Anyways, on to shading. I think every artist starts with the face. And since I'm more confident with feminine features, I started with Fern, then Stark. I mostly used my reference to figure out the structure of the neck and chest area, using a soft brush where I can kind of blend out certain areas. I always love painting ears. Since they are very thin, when there's a light source behind them, they turn quite red and almost see-through because of the subsurface scattering. Hair has a very different texture than skin, and to show its strands, I use these long, thin lines combined with very zigzaggy ones. I used a very high contrast for the hair, making it easy to distinguish and understand the form. You can also see a bit of reflective light creeping up that front surface of the hair, with light from Fern's hair or dress creating this lighter and cooler area. I've never actually painted purple hair, and I find it a very difficult color to work with. But for Fern, it was surprisingly not too challenging. I used the same high contrast and a hint of reflective light, and then I just clean it up a bit and add in some smaller strands. I pretty much use the same techniques to shade everything else too. For Stark's clothing, I start with a thick flat brush to mark out the shadows. It can get rather messy when I'm figuring this out, but I find it way more efficient to roughly experiment and see which works out best before looking at the finer details and fussing over how clean it looks. I kind of do reverse of what other artists do. Most artists do line art, then color under the line art, but I like to shade, then do a thin line art above it. This is because I like having my line art in the specific colors. So for like this clothing, it will be dark red, and Fern's hair, it will be dark purple. And I also just like the flexibility of being able to decide what goes under first, because I change a lot of things whilst I'm shading. So I don't like to be limited by things like line art. Anyways, I'm just adding in some minor details, which is easy to do because I've already figured out the main shape of the lighting and shadows. Just like with the hair, we've got the reflective light on the clothing too. A bit more noticeable here. This bluish gray gives a really nice way to balance off those strong colors and kind of ease your eyes a little. It also helps emphasize the proximity between the two figures. It's important to think of the environment of an object when you are shading. You need to think of what it's interacting with and how this will influence the colors. I also make sure to check my values by viewing the piece in black and white from time to time, and I thought that the dress could use some more contrast. Since everything else is high contrast, it wouldn't make sense for the dress not to be. So to fix that, I had to go over everything with a darker blue. And then I looked at the dress again and thought it looked too out of place. It clashed too much with the reds around it, and whilst contrast is good, too much isn't. So I decided to make the dress a more warm hue, and this was a lot better. Looking back now, I'm so glad I made this decision while shading this, and I had to go over the shadows again, but it's no problem, and the third time is the charm, right? You may have noticed this in other places too, but sometimes I'll take an airbrush out and soften some edges of the clothing folds. We have to remember that these folds aren't sharp, they curve, and that's going to create a softer shadow in most areas. The size of the clothing folds is also important. For a loose, flowy skirt, I use large folds and thus large shadows, but for areas with smaller creases and pinches in clothing, it will have smaller folds and more detailed shadows. This is, for example, areas like the shoulder ruffles and the area where Stark's hand is holding. The gloves were a bit difficult. The fabric is tight-fitting, so it mostly has small, intricate folds. It's hard to find the right balance between too many folds and too little. In fuller areas like her forearm, I just leave them blank to show that the fabric is stretched tight. In areas like the elbow joint or wrist, where the fabric won't be fully wrapped around the circumference of the body part, I add some smaller folds. Some final touch-ups like adding gray desaturated shadows within the dress folds and Stark's hand that I almost forgot. And finally, the shading for the main figures is done. Lastly, the background. Similar to other parts of the drawing, it took me a few tries to get right. I think backgrounds can either make or break an illustration. I had a really specific vision in my head, but for some reason it just wasn't working well when I painted it on the canvas. Just too many dark and muddy colors all competing with each other. plus it's difficult to add texture and lighting to the walls. I needed the people in the background to not stand out too much, so I used quite dark and desaturated colors at first, and I wanted them to also have different colored outfits, but at the same time not colors that will distract from the main couple. I felt like it was all too dark, so I added a layer of white, and surprisingly, this worked well. It added a bright, shiny atmosphere to the room. It kind of gives the effect of like almost a mist or smoke. Something that really brought this drawing together was the checkered pattern on the flooring. I also put in some subtle reflections of the dresses on the flooring to make it look more shiny. It's a simple yet effective trick, and I love the effect. After a few more adjustments, I start adding in some detail to the background characters. Not too much, but just enough so that you can distinguish the form. For things like this, you have to actually find a way to express detail without actually doing the details, if that makes sense. And this is where expressive brushstrokes come in handy. Where the dresses get closer to the floor, I make it fade lighter, just to account for that gleaming floor and the light that's bouncing off of it. I was really struggling with the wood texture and the top half of the background. At this point, I was like so done already, I just wanted it to be over. I was trying out a bunch of different brushes and also colors for the wood, like dark oranges and purples, and I just left it for a while and focused on a different part, replacing the candle, which was really bothering me, with a much more elegant chandelier, and I love it so much more. I could be pretty messy with this since I know I'm just going to be blurring it out in the end. And finally, I went back to the wall and just didn't overcomplicate it this time. I just kept it simple. And after blurring the background, the piece was pretty much done. I'm so proud of this piece, guys. Like, when I was drawing it, it didn't feel special, but looking back a few months later, I'm like, what? I did that? How? Anyways, thanks for making it this far. I hope you enjoyed watching my process on this Frieren artwork. And if you learned anything from this video, just to let you know, I also have a full course on Colosso where I do more detailed walkthroughs and guides on how to shade and render and a bunch of that stuff. So check it out if you're interested. And if you want to see any process videos for any of my other artworks, please just let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching and see you again soon.